This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Let the soldiers know that now is the hour when in their hands rests the fate of the entire motherland. Either Russia will fall, or she will be reborn. My soldiers, you are not armed and drawn up to fight for Peter. You fight for the nation entrusted to Peter by birth, for your kin, for the people of all Russia, the land that has protected you, the land that now awaits the decision of fortune. Remember as you fight that God and truth are on our side, and remember how many times the Lord of battles has shown us his favor. And know this of me, of Peter, that on my life I set no value, as long as Russia may live in piety, in prosperity, and in glory. There we have, in ringing masculine tones, the proclamation of Peter the Great, Tsar and autocrat of all the Russias, to his troops on the 26th of June 1709, the eve of the famous and seismically influential Battle of Poltava, the showdown that decided the Great Northern War. Dominic, quite possibly your favourite war, I think.
Oh, I love the Great Northern War. It genuinely is a great war.
It is a great war, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's very northern.
Yeah.
And it's a war.
Yeah. So it ticks every box.
It ticks every box going. And the reason it's a great war is that it marks the kind of definitive emergence of Russia as the superpower that it will be from that point on.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, that speech, which I think my deep masculine tone conveyed a sense of Peter as a titanic figure, not just historically, but physically. I mean, I hope people got that sense. But it's a speech that is obviously quite popular with the current leadership in Russia, isn't it? Because it's seen as a kind of great call to arms, to people to die for Russia.
Exactly. And they actually read this speech, or they often recite it to recruits in the Russian army. So even today, it kind of has a political resonance, I guess. And Vladimir Putin has compared himself with Peter the Great. He has compared the war in Ukraine with the Great Northern War.
And the Great Northern War fought against Sweden.
Yeah.
And the Swedes currently are kind of issuing all kinds of slightly nervous calls to arms, aren't they?
Yes.
So not surprising.
Although the interesting thing, of course, the Great Northern War, lots of people won't know this, is that the Swedes were the overdogs and Russia the underdogs in the Great Northern War, which seems completely bonkers.
Well, because this is a story not just about Peter the Great, but about his great rival Charles XII, one of the most, intriguing military figures of his age. But it's also about so much more, isn't it? Because the story of Peter the Great, it's mad in so many ways.
It's one of those historical stories. We don't get them that often, but it genuinely is one of those historical stories that a fantasy novelist would hesitate to invent it. So to give people a sense of the sweep before we get into the details, Peter became Tsar of Russia when he was 10. His early life was scarred by the most horrific violence. There was a struggle for power with his own sister. Then he got power. Then he did a mad thing. He went in disguise on a gap year to Western Europe, where he worked in the shipyards in Amsterdam and hung around with bishops and stuff in London and in Oxford.
And, of course, famously had wheelbarrow races in Deptford, which is one of our favourite topics on The Rest is History. I think we've covered it about 6 times already, and we're going to do it again in this series.
But never in as much detail as we're going to do it this time. And then he comes back. He cuts everybody's beards off. He fights this colossal war against the Swedes. He founds St. Petersburg. He fights the Ottoman Empire. He tortures his own son to death. And after all this, he dies peacefully in his bed, but he becomes the embodiment of Russia's aspiration to join the top table of the world's powers and to rank alongside the nations of Western Europe. So Peter has become this enduring symbol of the struggle for Russia's soul, caught between East and West, Europe and Asia. But as you said, it's not just about Russia. So it's about Poland, it's about Sweden, it's about the Ottoman Empire. It's sort of...
And it's about Western Europe as well, isn't it? As it's rising to kind of global power and wealth.
Yeah. It's like a late 17th, early 18th century version of Risk with a strong element of Game of Thrones and a strong element of Succession all kind of mixed together.
Well, I think there's a much more obvious television drama that is drawing on the life of Peter the Great. And that is a drama called The Great, which was actually about Catherine the Great. And it features Peter's grandson, who historically was a bit of a cipher and gets bumped off very quickly. But I think that the producers of that series were massively influenced by the example of Peter the Great. And I think that Peter III in that series is Peter the Great. And there's a lot of cavorting with dwarves, he has kind of cohorts of pals who are getting up to all kinds of unspeakable business. And he's always going, huzzah!
Right.
In a loud voice.
Perfect.
Nicholas Holt.
There's going to be an awful lot of that in this series, it's fair to say. All right, well, let's get into the man himself. So Peter's born in Moscow at 1 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of May, 1672. And he is the son of the second Romanov Tsar, Alexis, and his wife, Natalia Narishkina. And Peter's defining physical characteristic is that he's incredibly tall. And he was a very big baby. And we actually know exactly how big, because what they would do is they would kind of paint an exact reproduction of the baby, life size, on a board with an image of St. Peter on it. So you can kind of measure this image and you know exactly how big the baby Peter the Great was. And there's all kind of bells ringing in Moscow. There's cannons firing to celebrate the arrival of the Tsar's son. So Moscow is also a kind of character in this story. So Moscow is at this point, it's a few centuries old. It was founded in the late 12th century. What had happened is that the Mongols had swept over what is now Russia. And amid the chaos, the Principality of Muscovy, or Moscow, had risen and swallowed up its neighbors, a bit like kind of Rome, I suppose, in the Italian peninsula, had become the sort of defining power of the area, of the region. And so by now, it's a city of about 200,000 people, mainly out of wood. So
it's always burning down, isn't it?
Always burning down.
Just kind of basically every 5 years.
And every European visitors say, basically, it's a pretty terrible place. It's full of fires. It's full of plague. It's very dangerous. The streets are full of kind of footpads and beggars and whatnot. But there's a kind of exoticism to it even then. So the culture of Moscow, of Muscovy, is this really interesting fusion of the legacy of Kievan Rus, the kind of the semi-state that Harold Hardrada visited a few weeks ago, that had been established by the Vikings when they'd gone east. And it's that, and it's the Mongols' golden horde that has swept over it. But above all, orthodoxy. So it sees itself as carrying, the sort of precious gift of Christian orthodoxy, especially after the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Yeah. So it's come to call itself the Third Rome.
The Third Rome. So we have basically inherited the flame from Constantinople that they had inherited from Rome, and we are keeping it alive. And Muscovy has expanded and expanded. By 1547, the Grand Prince Ivan IV, who we know as Ivan the Terrible, had crowned himself Caesar, not just of Muscovy, but of what he called all the Russias. So now you have people talking about Russia. In other words...
And Caesar is Russified to Tsar.
To Tsar, exactly. So he did that in the late 16th century. But by the late 17th century, so by 1672, when Peter the Great is born, Russia is now the largest country on earth. It has expanded at a colossal rate. So at this point, they've already gone all the way across the forests of Siberia, largely uninhabited, all the way to the Pacific. They've gone down to the Caspian Sea, and they're obviously very, their borders go as far as basically Eastern Europe. So it's a huge country, by far the biggest on earth, but it is a kind of lumbering, weak giant. I think that's how most people perceive it, because it's surrounded by enemies, all of which you would think are more deadly, more powerful, more impressive. So there are three countries in particular that will play a massive part in this story. So to the west of Russia, you have a country that is very dear to the hearts of members of the Rest is History Club, and it's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Very exciting. They'll be cheering in the streets of our Discord, as you mentioned that.
Yeah. So the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is this very strange state, all we need to say about it at this point is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth has basically been kicking the Russians around for quite a long time. They'd actually occupied the Kremlin in Moscow in 1610. However, the Poles have passed their peak and are now in kind of a long-term decline, as we will see. Now, to the south, there is the Ottoman Empire. They are a massive superpower. So they control the Black Sea, they control the Balkans, through their vassals, the Tatars, they control Crimea, and their influence goes well into Ukraine.
Yeah, and they've been attacking Vienna.
They have. So the Ottomans are a serious, serious player, and basically the Russians have never challenged the Ottomans. They are kind of frightened of them. And then to the north, there is the great rival, which is Sweden. So the Swedish Empire has only recently become a great power. But at this point in time, 1672, it controls Finland, Estonia, and Latvia, as well as parts of northern Germany. And the Swedes are regarded as by far the most potent and formidable fighting force in Western Europe.
So that's the legacy of Gustavus Adolphus, isn't it? Who was the great sword of Protestantism in the 30 Years' War. So Sweden is a Protestant power.
Yeah.
The Ottoman Empire obviously is Muslim. Polish-Lithuanian conflict, it's all kinds of religions flourishing there, but essentially Catholic. So Russia, as the Orthodox power, is surrounded not just by geopolitical rivals, but by religious rivals. And presumably that because it's the only Orthodox power, because Constantinople's been conquered, that must presumably intensify both its sense of being beleaguered by heretics, but also the sense of mission that it has as God's chosen vessel.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. So orthodoxy is probably the single defining thing about Russian culture. So to give you a sense of what Russian society is like, it has 4 times as many people as, let's say, Sweden. But
about the same number as Poland, right?
Right, exactly.
And not nearly as many, say, as France.
No, nowhere near as many as France. And very, very few of these people live in towns. There are very few Russian towns. The vast majority are illiterate peasants. And sort of culturally, it feels very different from, let's say, Sweden or Poland, because frankly, to use a word that academics don't like to use now, it is very backward. So because the Orthodox Church has such a stranglehold, it has no universities, it has no schools, it has no playwrights, it has no scientists, it has no parliament, it has no newspapers, it has no navy.
Right, and the navy... that's in large part because it has no ports, right? It has Archangel on the north, so the Arctic.
But often that's frozen.
That's frozen for 6 months or whatever. It doesn't have a port on the Black Sea.
No.
And it doesn't have a port on the Baltic.
No. Because
the Black Sea is an Ottoman lake, and the Baltic is essentially a Swedish lake at this
That's
point.
right. So a way to think of Russia is as quite effectively landlocked and isolated country. When people go to Russia, they say, European ambassadors and whatnot, they say it is like going a little bit backwards in time. Even the way in which people talk about the Tsar feels sort of, he's a magnificent figure. He is the father of the Russian family. His noblemen prostrate themselves in front of the Tsar. They use this sort of language, I'm your humble slave, I'm but a lowly worm, all of this sort of thing. If you talk to the Tsar, you have to use his full official title at all times, and you can never repeat what the Tsar has said to you. There is this sort of pervasive culture of conservatism and deference, I guess. And nowhere is that more pronounced, of course, than the Kremlin itself. So again, as with Moscow, I think we should give a sort of portrait of the Kremlin so people who are not familiar with it can get a sense of what it's like. It's basically the word means a citadel. It's a citadel within the city. It is cut off from the rest of the city by a moat and by huge walls. And at the center of the Kremlin, where a lot of the dramas of Peter's life will play out, there is Cathedral Square, and there are 3 cathedrals. If you've ever been, I have been, and it's an amazing, amazing place to visit. There's these medieval cathedrals, and there's a palace called the Palace of Facets, which still stands, with a grand staircase running down the outside, which is called the Red Staircase. And there's going to be some very exciting action to come.
The red staircase will be reddened.
It will indeed. So let's talk about Peter's family. His father is called Alexis. His nickname is Tishaisi, which means the quietest. He's monkish and kind of pious and modest and whatnot. And Natalia, his wife, is his second wife. So it's this classic thing where the Tsar has had 2 wives, and there's a little bit of tension between the 2 sides of the family. So the first marriage was to a woman called Maria Miloslavskaya, and she had 2 surviving sons, lots of daughters and 2 surviving sons. And one is called Fedor, and he's 11 years old, and he is bright and a nice chap, but he's very sickly. And the other one is called Ivan, who is 5, and he's kind of half blind. He's got a very serious speech impediment.
He's like Claudius, only...
Yeah, slightly more so. Anyway, their mother, Maria Miloslavskaya, had died, and Alexis had to choose another bride. And the rules are she has to be Orthodox, so she basically has to be Russian. And they would always have a kind of bridal show of candidates. So these women would be from the noble families, the boyar families, would be brought to the court, and they'd have to prove their virginity.
And some of them might even be serfs, isn't that right?
That's right, yeah.
It's the whole spread. But am I also right that actually this is all a bit of a sham?
Yes.
Because the Tsar has already decided who he wants.
He has.
It's been a real kind of coup de foudre.
It hasn't. Well, so basically it's very Henry VIII. His chief minister, who's a guy called Artemon Matveyev, has pushed forward his ward, who is called Natalia Narishkina. Now, she's supposedly very beautiful, very dark, very sort of demure. And Alexis took a massive shine to her. She's Peter the Great's mother. So they get married. And obviously, this is brilliant news for the chief minister, who's Matveyev, who is a really interesting character.
And that's his surname, isn't it? He's not called Matt.
No, he's not called Matveyev. His name is Artemon Matveyev, exactly. Right. He's interesting because he really anticipates Peter, because he is a meritocrat and a modernizer. He's the son of a diplomat. He collects books. He has his own laboratory and his own private theatre. He's really interested in kind of Western innovations. And what is more, he is married to somebody from our own island. So his wife is called Mary Hamilton, and she is the daughter of a Scottish royalist who fled abroad after the execution of Charles I.
Because although the Russians are quite xenophobic,
yeah, the
Tsar himself has a lot of sympathy for exiles from the civil wars in Britain, doesn't he? Because he's absolutely appalled that an anointed king has had his head chopped off.
Exactly. And actually, so that story about the chief minister Matveyev being married to this woman tells a wider story. So during the 17th century, merchants and diplomats had been arriving in Russia in ever greater numbers, and Alexis had established a segregated quarter outside Moscow, which comes to be known as the German suburb.
Because they think all foreigners basically are Germans, is that right?
Yes, exactly. And they say all these Germans, whether they be Dutch, Scottish, English, or whatever, or indeed German, they have to go and live there. There's about 3,000 people there, and they're allowed to keep up. I guess it's a bit like living in one of those compounds in the Middle East.
Yeah.
In Saudi Arabia
or something. Yeah.
Exactly. There they can put on plays, they can smoke tobacco, which is disapproved of in Russia. They can mix with women, again, which is the mixing of the sexes is disapproved of in Russia. And we know that their influence is spreading outside, that people are copying them, because when Peter was 3 years old, Alexis had to give a rollicking to his courtiers and said to them, stop adopting German customs, stop cutting your hair and wearing hats of foreign design. So the Russians take all this stuff, which seems so comical, they take it incredibly seriously. If you turned up smoking and wearing a foreign hat, you would be in enormous trouble with the Tsar.
But also with the Orthodox Church, because for complicated reasons that I'm not entirely sure of, they've essentially see the smoking as and foreign hats as anathema to God.
Yeah, that's right.
Literally.
Yes. or indeed been clean shaven. So
Yeah,
you and I
even
would
worse.
that would be regarded as very poor behaviour. Now, there are hints that Peter's mother, Natalia, also likes this fascination with Western habits, that she's probably got this from Matveyev because she's been spending so much time in his house. So she clearly doesn't really like the atmosphere of the Kremlin, which is all bells, incense, beards, sort of
patriarchs.
dark corridors. So when Peter's a little boy, he and his mother spend most of their time outside the city. And we only have a couple of kind of glimpses of him. There's a story about him riding with some dwarfs on a coach.
I mean, there are a lot of dwarves in this story.
But then the first of many bombshells in this story, his father catches a chill and dies at the age of 47 in 1676. So that's what's Peter? He's about 3.5, something like that. And he is succeeded by the older of Peter's two half-brothers. So this bloke, Fedor, who's now 14. And he is so sickly that he had to be carried to his own coronation. So that's actually really bad news, you would think, for Natalia and for Peter, because the old family, the previous wife's family, are now in the driving seat, the Miloslavskis. And running through this story is a sort of rivalry between these two clans, the Miloslavskis, who were the first wife's family, and Natalia's family, who are the Narishkins.
And Matt.
So Matveyev, the chief minister, he is stripped of all his property, he's arrested, and he's sent to an obscure town in the Arctic Circle.
Oh, God.
So that's bad news for him. So now Peter sort of disappears from sight inside the Kremlin. It's not that bad. Fedor is actually his godfather and is actually quite nice to him and makes sure he's educated and all this sort of thing.
So he's not going all Suetonius.
No.
On his kind of rival.
No, not at all.
His little half brothers.
I think some of these people you think, they must be the most awful butchers and kind of callous, cruel. This is not the case at all. So Fedor is quite nice to Peter. And he's a little bit of a reformer, Fedor. But he dies young as well. So he rules for 6 years and then he dies. And now we have a big succession crisis. So it's 1682. Peter is 10 years old. He's this big boy, huge and bright. But he's only a child, of course. And he has one remaining half-brother, who is Ivan, who is 16 years old. He can't walk. He can't see. He speaks only with difficulty. So he's also not an outstanding candidate. And there are two camps, basically. There's the Miloslavskis who want Ivan, and there's the Narishkins who want Peter. And there's great arguments. There's actually arguments around Fedor's deathbed. And the patriarch goes out onto the red staircase and he says to the crowd, who do you want to rule? Do you want Ivan Alexeyevich or do you want Peter Alexeyevich, son of Alexis? And the crowd shout for Peter. Oh, we want Peter. The patriarch says, brilliant. He goes back inside. He kneels before the 10-year-old Peter and says, will you be our Tsar with your mother Natalia as the regent? Yes, brilliant. Get that bloke back from the Arctic Circle. Matveyev. Get him back. He can be chief minister again. So it all looks great for Peter. Okay, he's 10, but, everything has gone his way.
What could possibly go wrong, Dominic?
There is a twist. There is an extraordinary twist. So I mentioned offhand that Peter's father's first wife, Maria Miloslavskaya, had a lot of daughters. Now, normally, these daughters were just shoved into a place in the palace called the terem, like the kind of harem, and never let out again. It's princesses. But there's one of them who is clearly a really exceptional woman. She's called Sophia. She's almost 25. She's very clever. She's very brave. She had been educated alongside her brother Fedor, which is very unusual. And when Fedor was Tsar, she had gone to his council meetings. She'd talked to his ministers.
I mean, this is really exceptional, isn't it? Because it is hard to overemphasize how chauvinist Russian political culture is.
Exactly.
I mean, extraordinary details about how when a woman is married, the father will hand over a whip to the man who's marrying her.
Yeah, now you're in charge.
Your turn.
Yeah,
there you go.
I know. It's terrible. So from Sophia's point of view, the accession of Peter, her half-brother, that's terrible news. Like, she's going to be shoved into this sort of corner of the palace and never come out again. And she's a spirited...
Yeah, who's been attending the council and stuff.
Right.
So kind of death.
And so she basically says to the patriarch, what? At least have joint monarchs, Peter and my brother Ivan, because if you don't, then that's the end of me kind of thing. So she makes a massive spectacle of herself. She goes to Fedor's funeral. She breaks down in tears very conspicuously. She says, Fedor was actually poisoned. My sisters and I are in danger for our lives, all of this kind of thing. So she's sort of reminding everybody that she's still there. But what's crucial is that she has very powerful allies. And these allies are effectively the Praetorian Guard of Moscow, who are the Streltsy. And the Streltsy are Russia's first ever professional kind of standing army. They were founded by Ivan the Terrible a century earlier. There's 22 regiments of them. They're musketeers and pikemen.
And they're stationed in Moscow.
They're stationed in Moscow. They wear the most amazing outfits. They have these kind of long...
They wear caftans, don't they?
Caftans, yeah. And yellow boots and kind of fur hats and stuff. They look brilliant.
You see, fur hats... I would be menaced by a man in a fur hat.
Would you?
But
and
I
yellow
can't
boots.
Yellow boots, but a caftan.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit Narnia, I think. Yeah. I think. Anyway,
Summer of Love, isn't it?
They're in. Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's actually San Francisco in 1967.
Yeah.
They basically become a hereditary caste. So you pass down your place in the Streltsy from father to son. But the Streltsy are always falling out among themselves. The officers treat their men like absolute dirt. And what is more, the officers get the men to basically do things like dig their gardens for them and kind of, do odd jobs. And the men hate doing that. So by coincidence, while Fedor has been dying, there's been a mutiny among some of the Streltsy. They're sort of pikemen and musketeers. They accuse their officers of abusing them and stealing their money. And Sophia and her allies use this. They're like, brilliant, we can use this. We can use these mutineers. And they go to the Streltsy. They clearly spread rumors among them. They say, listen, Fedor was poisoned by foreign doctors working for the Narishkins. If Peter becomes Tsar, then foreigners will be given all the commands in the army and orthodoxy will be undermined. And actually, Natalia, Peter's mother, is planning a massive crackdown against you, against the Streltsy. So you should do something about this. So this clearly begins to seep into the sort of the Streltsy's imagination. And then the denouement comes on the morning of the 15th of May. So two of Sophia's mates, her sort of aristocratic mates, ride into the Streltsy quarter of Moscow and they say, the Narishkins are taking over the Kremlin. They have murdered Ivan, which is actually not true. They're going to kill the whole royal family. Quickly to the Kremlin, to arms! And the Streltsy rush out of bed. They put on their armor, they get their weapons, and they march into the center of Moscow. Their banners flying, kind of drums beating, and they're shouting, we're going to the Kremlin, we're going to the Kremlin, we're going to kill the traitors. They get to the Kremlin. The guards at the Kremlin let them in, and they swarm into Cathedral Square, which is in front of this palace with the red staircase. And they're shouting. There's just basically a mob of men waving pikes and shouting, give us the Narishkins, give us Matveyev, death to the traitors, death to the foreigners, all this sort of thing. Inside, Natalia, Peter's mother, Peter, this guy Matveyev, they're all there. Oh, gosh, what are we going to do? And Matveyev says to Natalia, look, you have to calm them down. You have to tell them this is all nonsense. Go out onto the red staircase, take the two boys, Ivan and Peter, show them to the Streltsy.
So, Dominic, this is quite like Marie Antoinette confronted by the women from Paris.
It's exactly what it is. It's exactly, I was thinking that myself. Natalia shows tremendous courage. She takes the two boys, 16-year-old Ivan who can barely walk, 10-year-old
He's meant
Peter,
to be dead.
He's meant to be dead, but he's not dead.
Yeah.
She takes them out onto the staircase. There's priests and kind of the boyars, noblemen behind her. And below, there's this massive mob of men in yellow boots. Yeah, waving their pikes and shouting for her blood. And she says, here are the Tsar and the Tsarevich. There are no traitors. You have been deceived. And some of the Streltsy don't believe her. And they go up the stairs. They go right up to Ivan. They say, are you really Ivan Alexeyevich? And he says, yes, I am, kind of thing. And they're like, And then eventually they go back down the stairs. Matveyev steps forward. He's the chief minister. And he says, look, chaps, you've been misled. This is all a massive misunderstanding. I will give you all a pardon. You should go home. And do you know what? It works. They seem to listen. He says, brilliant. He goes back inside.
But Dominic, do you know what a Roman emperor would have done in that situation? He would have given them a massive bung.
Yeah, he would.
He'd have given them a large amount of money. So that's where I think Matt went wrong.
Well, and also what goes wrong now is one of their commanders steps out onto the Red Staircase. So one of the nobles who's like nominally in charge of them, who's a guy called Prince Michael Dolgoruki. And he says, well, you've been told now, you've disgraced yourselves. You've let yourselves down. You've let Moscow down. You've let the good name of the Streltsy down. Go back home to your barracks. And if you don't do as you're told, I will flog you. And this is this is a foolish move from Prince Dolgoruki. Because when the Streltsy hear this, they say, what? Oh, actually, we're not going to... No, forget it. The mooted is back on. They charge up the stairs, they grab him, and they throw this bloke over the balustrade onto the pikes of the men below. So he's impaled on the pikes.
Well, that's him told.
Yeah. Now, there's a wonderful book about Peter the Great by Robert K. Massey, and I've had to restrain myself from just quoting enormous chunks. But it's one of my... He really goes for it in this passage. He says, the crowd roared its approval, shouting, cut him to pieces. Within a few seconds, the quivering body was butchered, bespattering everyone around with blood.
That's my kind of prose.
This is just the beginning. So the Streltsy now go absolutely they go berserk. They charge up the stairs. They've drawn their weapons. They burst in. The first person they see is Matveyev, who stunned to see them because he thought everything had passed off successfully.
He'd sorted it out.
He's chatting to Natalia, who's still holding the hands of the two boys. They grab Matveyev. They drag him outside. He's kicking and screaming. They throw him over the balustrade too, onto the waiting halberd points, and he is hacked to pieces too. So the square is covered with the blooded pieces of Prince Dolgoruki and this bloke, the chief minister. And now the Streltsy are like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So now they really kind of turn it up to 11.
And what about Natalia and Peter and Ivan?
Well, she's there quivering with the two boys while the Streltsy are charging into the palace around them. They're basically in a corner, kind of sobbing, terrified. And the weird thing is that they're almost ignored. The Streltsy are just like, let's go through the palace and kill everybody. So they round up, they do what you would always do in this situation. I think you round up the dwarves. They round up the court dwarves and they say to the dwarves, if you don't tell us where the Narishkin family are, all the members of the Narishkin clan, we will kill you. So the dwarves rather let that good name of dwarves down, I think, because they do betray a lot of the Narishkins.
No, but I think you're being very harsh there on the dwarves. I mean, what would you do in that situation?
I'd have thrown my lot in with the Streltsy hours before, I think it's fair to say. Yeah, I would. So the Streltsy are kind of rampaging through the palace. They're thrusting pikes into the cupboards and stuff to try in case there's anyone hiding there. To quote Robert K. Massey again, those who were caught were dragged to the Red Staircase and thrown over the balustrade. Their bodies were dragged from the Kremlin through the Spassky Gate into Red Square, where they were tossed onto a growing pyramid of dismembered human parts. So this goes on all afternoon. They're just killing dozens of people. And at nightfall, at last, the Streltsy get tired. It's quite tiring work, I think, hacking people to pieces with a pike or something. So they get tired and the violence begins to die down. But, Tom, the whole crisis is far from over, and we'll find out what happens next after the break.
Thrilling. So if you want more violence, more bits of people being chopped into pieces, don't go away. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
Welcome back to The Rest is History. Dominic, it's all kicking off in Moscow, in the Kremlin. We are May 1682. the Streltsy, these guys in yellow boots, caftans, furry hats, have stormed the Kremlin, and they're basically chopping people that they don't like into little pieces. And inside the palace of facets in the Kremlin, poor little Peter, only 10 years old, with his mother, with his half-brother Ivan, they are huddled in a corner, and they must be kind of worrying whether they might be joining the dismembered body parts out in the court.
Of course, because the Streltsy have kind of gone for a rest, but the next morning they come back for more. So Natalia and Peter and Ivan are still sort of in this corner, kind of crying and whatever. They've had a sleepless night, terrified that they're going to be thrown into pike points as well. The Streltsy return. They say to Natalia, well, there are probably loads of your relatives still here, and we're going to kill them too. And they have a particular hatred of her brother, who's also called Ivan, confusingly. And they basically say, we're not going to give up until we've found him, we've chopped him into pieces too. And so for the next 2 days, they're all trapped in the palace while the Streltsy are just searching like drawers, cellars, behind the wardrobe, under the bed, looking for Natalia's brother. And eventually the Streltsy say, oh, this is ridiculous now. This has got massively out of hand. Look, if you don't give up your brother, we will kill everybody. We will literally kill everybody in the palace, including the royal family. And Sophia, who's sort of been behind all this, but is hanging around, the sister who's hanging around as well, she goes up to Natalia in front of everybody, and she says, your brother will not escape the Streltsy. There is no way out. To save our lives, you must give up your brother. And poor old Natalia, she's in floods of tears, and she basically says to her servants, go and get him. And they dig him out from whatever kind of cupboard he's been hiding in.
He'd hidden in the cupboard, hadn't he? And they'd left the door open, so it looked like they'd already searched it.
That's it.
Very
that's
clever.
it. Yeah. So she takes him into the palace chapel. He's given communion for the last time. She gives him an icon of the Virgin to hold. And then she leads him outside. And maybe, if this was a film, there'd be a lovely twist now where the Streltsy actually, they're moved by this scene and the sight of him with his icon of the Virgin.
But they're not.
But no, they're not. They drag him out into Red Square. They torture him. They kind of
because they break his wrists and ankles, don't they? So that they're kind of flopping.
Yeah, it's
horrible scene.
It's a dreadful scene. They do this weird thing where they lift his body up on their spear points and kind of parade him around, and then they just cut him up and then they stamp on all the pieces, which just seems unnecessary. I think.
Yeah,
I would call that's robust even by Russian standards, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say the Streltsy's methods are a little bit unsound. Would you agree with that, Tom?
I think I would.
So anyway, they've completely won. They end up being appointed as the palace guard. The Kremlin's silver is all melted down to give the Streltsy 10 rubles each.
Oh, so there's the Caesar's policy.
Yeah, but too late. Late, right? They're given a triumphal column in Red Square in which the names of all the people they've killed are inscribed as common criminals. So Peter is not actually deposed, but Sophia gets her way so that her brother, Ivan, is raised to joint Tsar and is going to be listed first, and she will be the regent instead of Natalia.
But Natalia is fine, isn't she?
Yeah, she's not executed or anything like that.
No.
So there's a coronation 2 weeks later, joint coronation of Peter and Ivan. And this gives you a sort of sense of Russia's culture at the time. So they are crowned with a thing called the golden cap of Monomac, which is a sort of skull cap ornamented with gold and pearls and trimmed with fur. And it's got a golden cross on the top. And the legend has it that this was presented to Vladimir II of Kiev by the Emperor Constantine IX Monomachus. And, this is obviously, this is actually nonsense. It probably wasn't. But the claim is that this is the incarnation of Moscow's role as the Third Rome, that this is a kind of symbol of its lineage, I guess. But interestingly, this is the last time that cap, which still exists, this is the last time that cap is ever used to crown a Tsar, because for Peter, this whole business has been so traumatic and so defining. He's seen about 40 of his relatives slaughtered in the most horrendous circumstances. And he, even as he's being crowned, I think he's burning with this tremendous hatred of the Streltsy, but also of what they represent, which is precisely this: Russia's medieval past, its heritage from Constantinople, what he sees as its kind of barbarism and superstition.
So kind of icons with candle wax dripping down them and all of that.
A golden icon kind of glimmering in the murk.
Yeah.
With smoke from candles in front of it and men with gigantic beards chanting. This, which a lot of people find very attractive about Russian culture and is part of the sort of slightly Orientalist fantasy of Russia, Peter despises this. He says, actually,
well, I
reality...
think fair enough, to be honest.
Yeah, because just off camera are a load of blokes with pikes kind of chopping my relatives into pieces.
Jumping up on the kind of body parts.
Exactly. So I think this is the world that he is determined to destroy, and this becomes a defining feature in his life because he's had this, this horrendously upsetting experience when he was just 10 years old. Anyway, so he's slightly out of the picture because Sophia is now the mistress, I think you could say, of Russia. Now, unfortunately, we have only really one good description of her, and it came from the French envoy. And he wrote an unbelievably, I don't think you could get away with this now. It's not
gallant.
It's not at all. He really lets France's traditions of chivalry down. So Theo, close your ears. He wrote, her mind and her great ability bear no relation to the deformity of her person, as she is immensely fat, with a head as large as a bushel, hairs on her face and tumours on her legs. But, he then said, in the same degree that her stature is broad, short, and coarse, her mind is shrewd, subtle, unprejudiced, and full of policy. So she is an impressive person.
Peter himself later says that she's physically very prepossessing. I mean, this is kind of years on. And also, I mean, maybe the very fact that is the only description of her implies that actually she can't have been that repulsive, or others would have commented on it.
I like the fact that you're defending Sophia's...
Well, I quite like her.
Yeah, I do too. I think she's very impressive.
She's a figure of some glamour.
So she has two very impressive lieutenants. She has a new Streltsy commander, who's a guy called Shaklovity. And her chief ally is a man called Prince Vasily Vasilyevich Golitsyn. So the Golitsyns are one of Russia's most prominent noble families. And this guy, Golitsyn, becomes her chief minister. And he later on becomes one of Peter's great antagonists. And yet Golitsyn as well is a kind of westernizer. So he's fluent in Latin and Greek. His palace in Moscow is full of kind of Western artworks and German maps and Venetian mirrors and things. He's a huge admirer of Louis XIV. He's sort of saying, we should really modernize ourselves. We should have religious tolerance. We could emancipate the serfs. We could have a new army, all of this kind of stuff. And so actually he and Sophia, who are the kind of villains in the Peter the Great story, they run Russia really well for the next kind of decade or so.
And it's mad, isn't it, that a woman is in a position of power in Russia when you think of how institutionally and culturally sexist it is.
Yeah. It's mad, and it's a massive tribute to her political deftness, isn't it? To her dexterity. Because actually Russia is, in the next few years, is quite quiet. Golitsyn, however, he gets sort of trapped by foreign policy. His big achievement is he negotiates a treaty with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth after years of war that gives Russia a lot of territory, including Smolensk and Kiev and eastern Ukraine. So this
is the first time that Muscovy gets its hands on Kiev.
Exactly. But the price for this treaty is the Poles say, well, you have to join in with us and our allies, who are the Habsburgs and Venice, fighting the Ottomans. That's the price. And Golitsyn said, well, fine. I mean, I don't really want to fight the Ottomans, but we will. We'll attack the Khanate of Crimea because, that's an Ottoman vassal and that's kind of doable. And as we will see, this becomes a decisive moment in the story of Sophia and Golitsyn. Now, meanwhile, before we come to what happened about that, let's look at what's been going on with Peter. So Peter's only 10 years old. He is kind of just a figurehead. He's always been dragged out for banquets and things to meet ambassadors. And the ambassadors write reports of him. They always say, he's a very likable lad. He has a frank and open face. His great beauty and his lively manner, his half-laughing mouth. He's a remarkably good-looking boy, all this kind of thing. These are kind of quotes from German doctors and Swedish diplomats and things. So people say, he's very impressive. One day he'll be a good Tsar. The good news for him is basically he can spend a lot of his time actually hanging out with his mum. They go to this. His father had a hunting lodge at a place called Preobrajenskoye.
Where?
Preobrajenskoye, Tom. Do you want to have a go?
No.
So he's hanging around on this country estate. And this is the point at which he gets into one of his great passions, which is kind of bonkers war games.
Well, because he's not just playing with toy soldiers, is he? He ends up playing with real soldiers and real artillery and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, he has been obsessed with war since he was a boy. He has always had sort of play soldiers.
Yeah.
His friends were chosen for him from other noble families and boyar families. And he basically, when he goes to this hunting lodge, he rounded up all his dad's old servants, the kind of falconers and the kind of hangers-on at the hunting lodge. And he said, I'm going to make you an army. And by the time he's in his sort of mid-teens, the word has spread around the area that the Tsar, because he is kind of still joint Tsar, he wants people to join his kind of play army. And so loads of young men turn up at this estate, some from noble families, some who are serfs, some who are grooms, all of this kind of thing. If you're 20 years old and you want a bit of a laugh, you turn up at this place because also, of course, it ingratiates you,
of course,
with the Tsar.
And the outfit that they're being given, these kind of play soldiers, are Western outfits, right?
Yes.
They're not the kind of kaftans and yellow boots. It's tricorn hats and...
Right, and a big green coat. A green coat and a kind of tricorn hat, exactly. And there's about 300 of them. They live in, he says, well, I'll build you a barracks. So they're given ranks. They're given a soldier's pay. So in the long run, these two regiments evolve into the Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky Guards regiments, which become the oldest regiments in the Russian army. And they were only disbanded, Tom, after the Russian Revolution. So there you go.
Such vandalism.
So basically, they spend all their time like digging trenches, playing war games, and Peter joins in, but he insists, and this is a defining thing about him. He says, I'm not going to be a commander, I'll just be a common soldier. He loves this kind of play acting, this role playing. So he says, I'm a drummer boy, and every now and again he gives himself a promotion, so he advances slowly up the ranks.
Becomes a bombardier, doesn't he?
He becomes a bombardier. But they do really matter. I mean, when we say they're kind of play soldiers, they spent a whole year building a fort, and then they held a siege attacking it with cannons.
And Peter playing on his drum.
Yeah.
But can I just ask, that thing of Peter not promoting himself over the heads of people who might be better qualified than him.
Yeah.
Is he also kind of making a political statement there, looking ahead that birth won't necessarily guarantee privileged position, do you think?
I think he is. I think it definitely has a political meaning. I think there's no way in a society that is so conservative and so hierarchical as 17th century Muscovy or Russia, there is no way that could not have a kind of political significance.
Because it's kind of instilling a notion that meritocracy will matter under his rule.
And as we'll see, he does this in very peculiar ways in other forms. Like he sets up his own kind of mock church, doesn't he? In his own mock court. And all of this stuff that is, this is when they're doing the sort of dwarf tossing and like playing terrible practical jokes on people with bellows and stuff like this.
Bears.
But all this sort of strange role playing runs all the way through his life. Like when he goes in disguise, sort of incognito, to Holland or to England, he's always...
But it's very subversive, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a society where the status of the Tsar is conveyed through what he wears and the postures that he takes. To subvert it so profoundly is, in effect, to subvert a lot of the ideology that is governing his monarchy.
That's right. Although the funny thing is, he'll subvert it kind of only so far,
up to a certain point.
Yeah, because if you really did treat him with no deference, I mean, he would kill you. He would like personally behead you or something.
But he's recalibrating what it is to be a Tsar. I mean, he's not abdicating his absolute rule.
No,
but he wants to reconfigure it.
Yes, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's right. And I think what's remarkable about him, it's not just the role playing; it's also his enthusiasm, his tremendous energy, and his curiosity. You know, he has insatiable appetite for learning things and for doing things.
And it's practical things as well, isn't it? So it's not just kind of learning about the broad sweep of the world, but it's about how do you make things?
Right. So he does things like when he's a teenager, when he was not sort of attacking fake forts and stuff, he has a big sort of clock, like a grandfather clock, ordered and brought so he can take it apart and put it back together. He has a carpenter's bench. He's the kind of boy who, he said, what do you want for Christmas? He'd say, a lathe.
He loves a lathe.
He's always messing around with lathes and stonemasons' tools. He learns to carve ivory. He learns to turn wood. He basically does a lot of things that I would hate to do because I have no interest in lathes. I'll just put that out there. But his biggest passion is the sea and ships. So in 1688, when he's 16? Somebody gave him a sextant, but nobody knew what it was or how to use it. And they said, there's some bloke in the German suburb. He's a Dutchman. He's called Franz Timmerman. He smokes a pipe. He'll show you. This bloke Timmerman turns up and he says, I'll show you how to use the sextant. And he ends up teaching Peter geometry and geography. And they go for these long walks together talking about geography. And one of these walks, that summer, they're in this estate and they find this shed full of junk. And they go into the shed. What's all this? And they find a boat upside down.
And Dominic, where has that boat come from?
Do you know where it's come from? It's come from our own country. It's come from England.
It's an English boat.
It's got masts and it's got sails and it can go against the wind. This is what Timmerman tells Peter. He says, look, if we sort this out, you could go sailing on this and it'd be amazing. And Peter, brilliant. He says, could you know anyone who can fix it? Timmerman says, well, I know another Dutchman called Carsten Brandt. He could repair it. Peter says, brilliant. They get this bloke Brandt to do this. They get this boat, they take it to the river, and then he goes sailing every single day. And do you know, that boat is in the Naval Museum in St. Petersburg to this day. The boat is called the grandfather of the Russian Navy.
And it's
an English boat.
Yeah, I love it.
Now, the Russians have never been interested in the sea. They're a landlocked country.
Because as we said, there's only Archangel. No Baltic, no Black Sea.
So everybody says, what's going on here? What's all this business? They're baffled by it. But Peter basically gets permission to go to a lake. He builds a boatyard on this lake. He says to this bloke, Brandt, this Dutchman, build more ships. And they start building like frigates and yachts and all this kind of thing. And I don't think you have to be a tremendous amateur psychologist to work out that actually this is about he dreams of escaping the suffocating, claustrophobic atmosphere of Moscow and of the Kremlin. And the sea, the salt, the breeze, all of that stuff, that's his dream.
Presumably the fact that his accomplices in this are both Dutch and that the ship is English, it means specifically that he's looking westwards. And it's around this time, isn't it, that he starts signing his name Petrus, so the Latin form of Peter. And of course, he's learning Dutch from speaking to these Dutchmen. So he is starting to look westwards in a way that no Russian leader had ever done before.
And a lot of people are very concerned about this. And actually, his mother, among them, she says, what's he doing? He's hanging around with all these Dutchmen in boats. He needs a good Russian wife. And so they have a kind of one of these bride shows. They assemble the candidates at the Kremlin. She picks one for him. He says, I don't care who you pick. I'm not interested. And she picks this 20-year-old girl called Eudokia Lopukina, who's from a kind of conservative Moscow family.
So what's her take on lathes and Dutchmen?
She hates a lathe. She loathes a Dutchman. She hates a boat. Robert K. Massey describes her as pink, hopeful, and helpless, which is a very nice description. Anyway, she and Peter, they clearly do have a relationship of sorts because they end up having a son, Alexis, but they don't really get on at all. When he's away on his boats, he never writes to her. She has a second son who dies as a baby. Peter doesn't even bother turning up to the funeral. He basically has no real interest in Eudokia at all. And as we shall see, the story does not end very well. Anyway, so he married Eudokia in 1689, January 1689, which is the year he turns 17. And sort of halfway through the year, his mother says, stop messing around with your boats, come back to Moscow. We've got a chance now to get rid of Sophia and Golitsyn and regain power. And you can take your place as the rightful, unchallenged master of Russia. Because, remember we'd said, as a price for that deal with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Golitsyn had said, I'll go and have a crack at Crimea. Well, that went horrendously badly wrong. The first expedition they did in 1687, they didn't even get there. They got halfway through Ukraine and then they basically gave up and went home. The Tatars, who are the masters of Crimea, are always raiding Ukraine. They take loads of prisoners and slaves and stuff. very humiliating for the Russians. In the summer of 1689, Golitsyn had a second go, an absolute shambles and a disaster. They got stuck on the isthmus that connects Crimea to kind of mainland Ukraine, and they had to retreat with about 20,000 people killed and 15,000 people taken prisoner.
And so, Dominic, at this stage, the geography of Russia is working against the Russians because they don't control all of it. No. So the classic thing, you find yourself marching for days and days across featureless steppes. This is happening to them. Anyway, Golitsyn and his bedraggled kind of remnants get back to Moscow and they declare victory. They say, well, we've won a tremendous victory against the Tatars. We're delighted with ourselves. Peter refuses to go to the kind of victory party. He says this is obviously nonsense. And it's clear that because he's 17, because he has the kind of the pretend army now. Yeah, but how pretend is it?
Exactly. There's growing tension. And Sophia's allies say to her, in fact, the guy who's the commander of the Streltsy, this guy, Shklovity, he says to Sophia, if you don't strike against Peter now, you have to kill him now, because otherwise he will strike against you. But she hesitates. She doesn't want to lose the moral high ground. And then on the 7th of August, she gets a note, an anonymous note, saying that Peter is going to attack you. He's going to attack you with his boy soldiers and kill you. Now, no one really knows where this note is from. But she sort of panics and she orders the Streltsy onto kind of full alert. Meanwhile, some of Peter's mates say to him, Sophia's going to strike against you. She's mobilized the Streltsy. So I think what's clearly happened is that people behind the scenes have been stirring up trouble and sort of turning the two against each other. And they say, you must flee for your life. So Peter and his friends do flee for their lives, and they flee to the most important and the holiest of all Russian monasteries, which is called the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius. So this is about 40 miles outside Moscow. And he holes up in this monastery with his friends, basically issuing proclamations saying, I'm the Tsar, my sister is and the Streltsy have been plotting against me. She's saying the same about him.
And Dominic, the salient thing about the monastery isn't just that it's very holy, but also that it has a massive walls, right?
Exactly. You can't storm it.
It's effectively impregnable.
It's like a fortress. So you have this weird situation all the way through August where Sophia is in the Kremlin, Peter is in this monastery. They're both describing the other one basically as a traitor, or are they planning a coup against me? All of this kind of business. And it reminds me a little bit of in a sort of much more protracted form, of the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev in 1991, where, the coup plotters had seized Moscow, but they weren't very powerful. You could see they weren't really up for it. They'd mobilized some of the army, but it was all very uncertain. And hour by hour, if people who remember that coup, the momentum was shifting away from them towards Boris Yeltsin. So Peter in this is Yeltsin. So at first you think, oh, well, he's fled to the monastery. Sophia's clearly going to win. But actually, because she doesn't manage to move against him over time, momentum moves more and more towards him. Lots of people are going to the monastery and saying, actually, I'm on your side, mate. I'm
and
with
is that
you.
Also reflecting the fact that, of course, Sophia is a woman?
Yes.
Whereas
I'm sure.
Peter is a strapping lad who enjoys playing with soldiers.
I'm sure. No doubt at all. So in early September, she decides to break the deadlock. She goes off to the monastery, and actually it's blocked by musketeers, the road. And they say, look, Peter's not going to see you. He doesn't want to see you. You've got to go back to Moscow. She goes back to Moscow. She goes back to the Kremlin. She has a massive meltdown, floods of tears, raging. She says, oh, Peter and his family, the Narishkins, they're going to kill us. It's all a disaster, all of this kind of thing. And then eventually the stalemate, the deadlock is broken, not by Russians, interestingly, but by the foreigners in the German suburb, because the Russian army, the high command are generally foreigners because they're the only people who know what they're doing. And yet again, Tom, it's a man from our own beloved country. It's a Scotsman called General Gordon.
It's great to have a General Gordon back on the show, isn't it? It's been so long.
It is. It's a great moment. There's a bloke called General Gordon.
But not the General Gordon who got nervous around women.
No.
And got killed in cartoon.
No,
not that one.
Not Chinese Gordon.
No.
This bloke is Russian Gordon. So we'll talk about him in the next episode, about his background, because he's an interesting character. He's a Scotsman, isn't he, General Gordon? And he has been serving in the Crimea and all this, and in his campaigns. He's been torn between the two camps for a long time. But he's very fond of Peter. He'd helped him with his war games. And what makes Gordon's mind up is he says, look, it's clear that actually only one of these people, only one of these camps has real ruthless killer instinct. And you always should back that person, the more ruthless, the more dangerous of the two parties. And that is Peter. And so one night he leads all the foreign officers to this monastery. They get there at dawn, and one by one they line up and they kiss Peter's hands. It's like the sort of Al Pacino in The Godfather or something. Yeah. Very, very Godfather. So the news of this reaches Moscow, and the Streltsy in their yellow boots say, oh, clearly Peter's going to win. So they change sides as well. And they arrest their own commander, this bloke, Shklovety, and he is beheaded. Prince Golitsyn, who actually was a very good ruler of Russia.
And a westernizer, so might have been an ally for Peter.
He's stripped of all his property. He's exiled to the Arctic, and he basically spends the next quarter century of his life, 25 years. He just lives in the Arctic, and no one knows what happened to him.
That's a terrible fate for a man who likes a harpsichord, isn't it?
Exactly. And poor old Sophia. I mean, we're quite fond of Sophia, aren't we?
Yeah.
She was exiled to a convent, and she lived there for 15 years and was never seen in public again.
But I mean, it could have been worse because she's not. I mean, she doesn't have her head shaved. She doesn't get given a kind of new name because she hasn't been made into to become a nun.
No, she just has to hang out with nuns, but she has to
hang out with nuns, but she has a certain degree of kind of independence.
A little bit, yes.
For now,
because we will see what happens later on. So now Peter, only when she's safely gone to this convent, does Peter ride into Moscow in triumph. And it's an amazing scene. This is kind of the end of your season 1 of the kind of Apple TV series or whatever. He rides in past lines of Streltsy, kind of kneeling in the dust to ask for his forgiveness. He goes through the gates of the Kremlin. He goes up to the cathedral, to the Domitian Cathedral. His brother Ivan is still there. He's still kind of hanging around. And he embraces Ivan, and then he goes into the palace. He puts on the robes of state, and then he steps out onto the red staircase, the very place where so many people had been butchered when he was 10 years old. He steps out to receive the acclamation of the crowd. So at long last, he's 17 years old. He is the master of Russia. His mother is going to serve as regent, but he really wields supreme power. And Tom, in the next episode, we will find out how he intends to use it.
Brilliant, Dominic. Thrilling stuff. And as you said, so much to come. So we've got Peter's gap year in Western Europe, going to Holland, going to England. He gets his revenge on the Streltsy. And then in subsequent episodes, we have the Titanic showdown with the Swedes in the Great Northern War. And believe me, it really is a great war. So Rest is History Club members, of course, can hear all the episodes in this series right now. And if you're not a member of the Rest is History Club, then you know what to do. You can head to therestishistory.com. But either way, we will be back for more Peter the Great themed action. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.